Welcome, brothers and sisters, to this week's sermon on the Wasteland monster and iconic Fallout creature, the Deathclaw. Deathclaws have been in every single game in one form or another, and the lore has been expanded, reduced, and changed through time, giving us a very interesting evolution and winding story all the way from the very first Fallout game to the present. I want to look at this story, warts and all, to see how Deathclaws have been portrayed in each game in chronological order, how the lore was built up, how it was pruned, and how the developers tried to portray a creature that is as much a part of Fallout's identity as almost anything else. So crank up the rads, my Fallout chads, and let's get up close and personal with the Wasteland's fiercest predator. In the very first Fallout, Deathclaws are not very common, and players will likely play through all the early game without ever running into one. Before the Vault Dweller ever sees or confronts a Deathclaw themselves, they will hear rumors of an extremely dangerous monster. Not everyone actually even believes these rumors though. Often the very first time the player hears of such a creature is when they arrive at the hub and learn of missing caravans, particularly those from the Fargo traders. Talking to Butch Harris, the leader of the Fargo traders, leads to dialogue where Butch refers to rumors of the Deathclaw that is supposedly to blame for the caravans going missing, but he is rather incredulous himself. He seems to consider the rumor to be rather absurd, and although he doesn't say it outright, doesn't seem to believe in the existence of the Deathclaw. He has you talk to an NPC named Beth, who is not nearly as skeptical as Butch, and not only believes the Deathclaw is to blame, but describes it in almost mythic terms. When asked what a Deathclaw even is, she answers with, "The Deathclaw is the most evil thing to rise out of the ashes after the war. Some say it's a powerful ghost from the war that haunts the land. It's no ghost, it's as real as you and me. It's 20 feet tall, with teeth as big as your arm. It's some kind of demon that found its way here when the world was engulfed in fire." Wow, that is quite the description. But the fact that there is a widespread conception of the Deathclaw being some sort of ghost or demon goes to show that, at least in this part of the wasteland, any actual exposure to a Deathclaw is basically non-existent. Beth then directs you to the one person that has actual claimed experience with a Deathclaw, everyone's favorite mutant tree ghoul thing, Harold. Harold describes the Deathclaw as being like a damn big man, with spikes and claws that cut through even heavy armor. Harold also says that it is very quick, and the best way he knows of taking one down is to aim for the eyes. Then Harold starts, well, being Harold, and goes on to tell the player that the Deathclaw can hypnotize people just by looking at them. Harold does have more accurate information than anyone else at this point, but it's still obvious that legends and myths have even worked their way into his description of Deathclaws. Well, that or he's just messing with us, which Harold does enjoy doing. Harold tells the player to talk to Slappy, an off-kilter man who apparently knows where the Deathclaw's lair is, although it's not exactly clear how. Now there's one more NPC that the player can encounter that will give a description of the Deathclaw. Just west of the hub, there is a chance at a random encounter, either with the Deathclaw itself, or with a man who is the lone survivor of a Deathclaw attack on his caravan. This sole survivor describes the Deathclaw as having huge horns, red skin, and is akin to something out of a story about demons. Finally confronting the Deathclaw in the caves where it resides makes a number of things abundantly clear. It cannot hypnotize you, its teeth are not as long as your arm, and it does not have red skin. However, the Deathclaw is noticeably larger than a man, appears to stand and move on two legs, and is a hunched reptilian with two large arms that sport particularly long and vicious claws on each hand. The Deathclaw also has a lot of HP, higher damage resistance to almost everything, has a slight weakness to lasers, and can deal heavy damage quickly due to the good amount of AP. In short, the Deathclaw is a mean creature who is quick enough to close the distance and start dishing out heavy damage at a withering pace. The encounter is usually very challenging and makes an impression in the player's mind. You really hope it will be a while before you find another one, because you're going to need better armor, better weapons, and a whole new stash of stim packs. Deathclaws are indeed seen in only one other place in the entirety of Fallout 1, all the way south in the Boneyard. An entire group of Deathclaws have come to occupy a place only known as the Warehouse, which a gang known as the Rippers used as their base until the Deathclaws wiped them out and took up residence. It is here we can observe and infer some things about Deathclaws and their behavior. They seem to be fine living solo, like in the case of the Deathclaw up near the hub, or in groups like down in the Boneyard. There are 3 types of Deathclaws shown in the first Fallout. Deathclaw Spawn, which are young Deathclaws that lack much HP and don't do much damage. They seem to be watched over by the adult Deathclaws, which are a very real threat, and there appears to be one mother that gives birth to all the eggs, which she guards closely. The mother Deathclaw has the highest attack and most health of any Deathclaw type, and is an absolute force to be reckoned with. The player will get the chance to accept a quest to wipe out the Deathclaws in order to assist the Gunrunners, who are a group that are stuck close by, unable to move to a better place because the large group of Deathclaws are in the way. And these Deathclaws always seem to come back even when the Gunrunners manage to kill some of them. It is obvious that for the majority of the wasteland that Fallout 1 covers, Deathclaws are at most rare encounters that leave any lucky survivors permanently traumatized, and at the very least are just a legend to everyone else. Not even John Maxon, the High Elder and leader of the Brotherhood of Steel, believes in the existence of Deathclaws. When asked by the Vault Dweller if he knows anything about the Deathclaw, he replies that it is a stupid rumor, that people believe it to be a huge fanged monster, with some even saying it is a vampire-like creature. Now there's a reason I keep emphasizing the Deathclaw when quoting these characters, because that is another clue as to how Deathclaws are overall meant to be portrayed in Fallout 1. They talk about the Deathclaw like one would talk about some solitary legendary cryptid. The Loch Ness Monster, the Mothman, the Chupacabra. Deathclaws are meant to be this rarely seen but oft talked about legendary, horrifying, and deadly creature in a world that is already under constant threat of nightmarish beings. It is curious, though, that more word hasn't propagated from the Boneyard about the true nature of Deathclaws. Most of the residents of the Boneyard, the Gunrunners in particular, have no mythical beliefs regarding the Deathclaws. They acknowledge their existence and extreme danger in a very matter-of-fact way. In fact, the regulators who essentially run the show in Adytum first rose to prominence because they defended the settlement from raiders and the occasional Deathclaw attack. It is also worth noting that Deathclaws overall are very rare. Other than the group in the Boneyard, the only other Deathclaw that can be encountered is the one living inside of the hub, although it is likely that the hub Deathclaw is not solo because there are Deathclaw eggs in the Deathclaw lair that would need to be laid by a mother Deathclaw. No other area of the map has a set location where they can be found, and there are no random encounters with Deathclaws in the entirety of the map, except for right around the Deathclaw's lair, where the player has the chance of running into the Deathclaw. Deathclaws are the most deadly creatures in the entire game, but that's not counting characters like the Master, who is a supremely challenging foe and outclasses the Deathclaws in terms of lethality. They are the apex predator, though, of the Wasteland, and it is interesting to note that Interplay spent a good amount of time finalizing the design of Deathclaws. It's no secret at this point that Deathclaws were first envisioned as a mammalian, wolf-like creature, but was switched to a reptilian-like creature. It is said that this is due to Interplay utilizing their version of a Dungeons & Dragons creature called the Tarrasque, which went unused in another D&D based game that they were developing. The design still wasn't completely agreed upon, however, since a picture in the Fallout 1 manual shows a Deathclaw confronting the Vault Dweller, and it looks much different from the clay model that was made, as well as the actual in-game sprite. So Fallout 1 establishes the Deathclaw as a rare and almost mythical creature, found in only 2 places, can live solo or in a group, and is the apex predator of the wasteland. The next time we see Deathclaws are in Fallout 2, and holy crap does Fallout 2 expand Deathclaw lore. Previously, we had no indication of where the Deathclaws came from or what they really are. Are they the result of radiation-induced mutations? FEV mutation? Were they man-made or natural? Well, three main sources from Fallout 2 shed light on this. A doctor and herbalist known as Joseph lives among a group of intelligent Deathclaws, and yeah, those are a thing now, and we will get to that in a bit, but I just want to focus on what he says. Due to his proximity with the Deathclaws, since he lives with them, the trust that the Deathclaws have in him, and his medical background, he is able to tell the Chosen One several things. First, he tells the player that the Deathclaws appear to be mutated, horned Jackson's chameleons. That is interesting and worth looking at more closely, but Joseph goes on to say that the mutation factor in Deathclaws is quite high, meaning that there are some similarities to the normal Jackson's chameleon present, but there are even more differences. The Fallout 2 official strategy guide gives more details related to the Deathclaw's origins, although it is important to remember that the strategy guide is not as authoritative as in-game information. According to the guide, the Deathclaws were created to replace humans in close combat, search and destroy missions. The guide says that the Deathclaws were derived from mixed animal stock, so there is apparently more than just chameleon DNA in there. Incredibly, the strategy guide also says that the Master from the first Fallout refined the Deathclaw using genetic manipulation. Whoa, that is quite the detail. It is very interesting that of all the creatures that the Deathclaw could be derived from, the Jackson's chameleon is the basis, or the one single animal that makes up the largest portion of Deathclaw DNA. Now I say this because if we contrast the attributes of Jackson's chameleons to Deathclaws as we know them in Fallout and Fallout 2, they don't have all that much in common. Jackson's chameleons are well known for having 3 prominent horns on their head, one above each eye ridge and one on the nose, but the horns are almost exclusively present on males. Not only do both male and female Deathclaws have horns, but the horns look very different. They are proportionally much smaller, and they curve more than the chameleon's horns, and notably, the nose horn is missing. Other than the horns, Deathclaws are obviously reptilian with scales, as are chameleons, but that is about where the similarities end. While chameleons are very well known for their ability to change colors, it is never seen or alluded to that Deathclaws can do this as well. And instead of having a very long and sticky tongue to grab prey, the Deathclaws have massive front claws, large 3-toed hind legs, and large teeth to attack and consume just about any land animal. Another distinct feature of chameleons are the independently articulating eyes, which are noticeably absent, and instead the Deathclaw has forward-facing eyes much like a more conventional predator. The Deathclaws also seem to lay eggs that look like a large bird egg or something akin to what a dinosaur egg might look like. However, this is another difference with the Jackson's chameleon, which is the only species of chameleon that gives birth to live young. All other species do lay eggs, and I just find it kind of funny that of all the species of chameleon to choose as the main genetic basis, the one that doesn't lay eggs was chosen. Jackson's chameleons require high humidity, something that Southern California and the Western US in general is not known for, but Deathclaws seem to thrive just fine in the dry desert climate. Jackson's chameleons also differ massively on a behavioral level. They are not social creatures, living primarily alone and within their own territories. Mothers do not care for their young, and as a result, the baby chameleons are ready to fend for themselves and catch prey from the moment of birth, since the mother chameleons have no instinct to protect or provide for their young. All of this is in contrast to what we see in Fallout, where the only young Deathclaws are seen around their mother and other adult Deathclaws. All of this is to say that even if Deathclaws really are actually derived mostly from Jackson chameleon DNA, They are so vastly different on almost every single level that it's remarkable that the Jackson's chameleon was even used as the basis, and additionally, that the chameleon DNA could even be identifiable. Now, it is important to reiterate that Joseph says that there are more differences to the real-world Jackson's chameleon than there are similarities, but if we are talking about similarities, what are those exactly? The only commonality seemed to be that they are both reptiles and have horns, but even the horns are quite different in form and number. The detail that Deathclaws were first made for close combat and then refined into the monster that can be seen in-game is not substantiated by any in-game lore. In the first Fallout, the Master does recount an audio diary that he experimented on animals when he was still transforming into the Master and trying to understand the FEV that he fell into at the Mariposa military base. However, there is no mention of him having worked on and refined Deathclaws at any point, and I feel like that would be a notable event, since Deathclaws are second to no other creature in terms of lethality. This would also seem to imply that the Deathclaws originated on the West Coast and spread from Southern California. Alternatively, the Master refined version of the Deathclaw might be its own species, separate from the original Deathclaw that had been engineered some time ago in the past. Now on to the next big development in Deathclaw lore that was introduced in Fallout 2, and that is the introduction of intelligent Deathclaws. Intelligent Deathclaws are found in Vault 13, the vault that the Vault Dweller saved in the first Fallout by finding a water chip. But these intelligent Deathclaws are not the result of evolution or random mutation. An Enclave scientist in the Navarro base, Dr. Schreiber, is a special kind of evil, but he will divulge how the intelligent Deathclaws came to be. He tells the Chosen One that the Deathclaws were created by the Enclave because they were trying to get cheap, effective, expendable soldiers. Deathclaws have very tough natural armor and lethal claws, but they needed to have elevated intelligence to receive and understand commands. The Enclave injected captured Deathclaws with FEV, targeting parts of their brain in an effort to raise intelligence, and it was successful. They were aware of the dangers of making the Deathclaws too smart, and so they endeavored to just have them smart enough to follow commands, but not so smart as to question them. However, at least some of the Deathclaws were made a lot smarter than desired. So smart, in fact, that the Deathclaws knowingly played dumb, knowing that if they wanted a chance to escape their enslavement by the Enclave, they would need to play just dumb enough to fly under the radar and not raise suspicions. Joseph, the doctor mentioned previously that lives among and treats the Deathclaws in Vault 13, related that the average intelligent Deathclaw has the intelligence of an 8-year-old, with some that are even smarter. One of the smarter Deathclaws is Gorus, who disguises himself so he can travel more freely, learning about new cultures and becoming a traveling scholar. They are all smart enough to speak English by imitating human sounds, even though they lack vocal cords, although some can speak a lot more eloquently than others, and this allows them to interface with the Vault 13 central computer, issuing it vocal commands to control the vault processes. The intelligent Deathclaws, therefore, are very few in number, and escaped from slavery when they were deployed by the Enclave to help take Vault 13, and quickly took the opportunity to abandon the Enclave and make Vault 13 their home. Joseph has made some observations relating to the social aspects of intelligent Deathclaws, although it is very hard to know if these are specific to intelligent Deathclaws only, or whether normal Deathclaws share some of these attributes. Joseph remarks that they are pack animals with a rigid code of ethics. The pack is led by mutual consent, vesting leadership into an alpha male, and the pack is extremely loyal to each other, operating similar to a human family. They have a sense of right and wrong. Violence is not a tolerated way to settle differences, and they even have a concept of rules and crime. The mother Deathclaw is seen guarding her eggs and relates a story to the Chosen One where a human brought in a bomb to kill her and destroy all the eggs, which she was able to avert by knocking the bomb to the other side of the nursery and placing herself between the bomb and the eggs, showing extreme selfishness and care for her offspring. Although normal Deathclaws are not preoccupied with the philosophical underpinnings of moral systems, it is possible that they function as pack animals that are led by an alpha male, and the mother Deathclaws could be very protective and nurturing mothers. However, the most in-depth Deathclaw-related lore in Fallout 2 pertains to the intelligent Deathclaws, so we can't say anything for certain. Normal Deathclaws in Fallout 2 are seen often, especially in the more difficult parts of the wasteland and at higher levels, and can be encountered in almost any single part of the wasteland. While normal Deathclaws seem to be doing quite well for themselves, being far more common in the Fallout 2 wasteland, the intelligent Deathclaws do not have the same fortune. Frank Horrigan and his squad are eventually deployed to Vault 13 at some point on a mission to kill all the intelligent Deathclaws, and he mostly succeeds. The only two known surviving intelligent Deathclaws are Gorus, a potential companion and traveling scholar, and Zarn, a Deathclaw who was captured by the Enclave and was being studied at Navarro by Dr. Schreiber. The ultimate fate of intelligent Deathclaws as a whole is unknown. However, there are two possible endings in Fallout 2, but only one is achievable in the vanilla game. The only ending available to players is the so-called genocide ending, where all the Deathclaws are killed by the Enclave. The unobtainable ending would be available if the Chosen One kills Dr. Schreiber to keep the Enclave from being alerted to the intelligent Deathclaws, and they fix the sabotaged Vault 13 central computer. In this scenario, the Deathclaws become a thriving community and grow to such a size that they are forced to peacefully expand out to the surrounding areas. The ultimate fate of the intelligent Deathclaws is not made clear in the game, however. Fallout 2 has the same types of Deathclaws as the first Fallout, but introduces the so-called tough Deathclaw, which is a more powerful version of the normal Deathclaw, but is still inferior in every way to the Deathclaw mother. There is even a small tough Deathclaw that has lower health and attack than the normal Deathclaw, but a higher critical chance and higher damage resistances and threshold. So we went from a rare to encounter and mythical apex predator of unknown origin in the first Fallout in the year 2161 in the Southern California region to a much more common sight in Northern California and Western Nevada. They are still apex predators. We have learned that the Deathclaws are genetically modified, and the Enclave successfully created intelligent Deathclaws through FEV. The origin of Deathclaws as being the result of genetic experimentation is also confirmed, with the largest DNA contributor being the Jackson's chameleon. The strategy guide is of dubious canonicity, but states that the Deathclaws were created as weapons of war, although not stated by whom, and the Master had a hand in further refining Deathclaws into their ferocious state. Fallout Tactics used many of the same groups, weapons, and creatures of past Fallouts, but kinda did their own thing with them. Deathclaws are no different, and they have been changed so much that I would say that they are unrecognizable in anything but name. It is also important to state clearly that Fallout Tactics is no longer considered canon, and until a newer game or authoritative source confirms specific details, the events, characters, and creatures, we can only speculate that they might exist. It is Schrodinger's canon, if you will. Deathclaws are no longer scaly and reptilian. No, they are now mammalian and hairy, and understandably referred to as hairy Deathclaws. They stand more upright than the reptilian Deathclaws, have 6 horns, 5 on the head and 1 on the nose, and that nose horn is a funny addition because I was just saying how ironic it was that Deathclaws didn't have a nose horn when the Jackson's chameleon does, and they move around on a large foot with 4 toes. The origin of this new Deathclaw is unknown, but it occupies the Midwest area of Missouri and Kansas, presumably better able to handle colder winters than the American Southwest due to their hair. Although they look quite different, they have similar social behaviors, with a dominant female known as the matriarch or mother being the strongest of all the Deathclaw variants and nurturing and protecting her young. It is made clear that they are mammals, not only due to the hair, but because the young Deathclaws suckle from their mother. But nothing can be that simple, because the hairy Deathclaws also lay eggs. That is not the only bizarre information though, because the matriarch can actually speak English and converse with humans. Yes, similar to how the intelligent Deathclaws can mimic human sounds and speak with humans, the hairy Deathclaw matriarch can also speak, although she seems to be the only one of the hairy Deathclaws that can. Hairy Deathclaws maintain their position as one of the most dangerous creatures in the entire game, and continue to show increased mental resistance as well. Just like how earlier Deathclaws were unaffected by the animal friend perk, the Beast Lords, a raider-like group of people that can control and communicate with animals telepathically, could not control the hairy Deathclaws, and instead had to resort to imprisoning the matriarch to get the rest of the Deathclaws to cooperate. Hairy Deathclaws did not seem to go through a design evolution like the Fallout 1 and 2 Deathclaws, where the original Deathclaw started out as a wolf-like creature. They were then portrayed as a reptile in various forms until a specific look was finalized. The concept art, early renders, and in-game sprite are all incredibly consistent. Chris Taylor, the lead designer for the first Fallout, actually had some interesting remarks on the Fallout Tactics hairy Deathclaws. Quote, "I'm pretty sure the main reason that the Deathclaw lost its hair from concept to production was a technical limitation of the rendering software at the time. I can't remember if it was the amount of additional rendering time required, an animation issue getting all the hair to move properly, or something else, but it was something along those lines. The hairy Deathclaw in Fallout Tactics was inspired by the original concept. Plus, we thought it was nifty to show that there are variations and different mutations of the same stock beast. We probably should have had both versions, but that is a decision based on hindsight." So it is interesting to note that hairy Deathclaws were closer to the original concept, which apparently was passed over for the reptilian design because of technological limitations. I find this comment about there being different variations and different mutations of the same stock beast to be very interesting. I take this to mean that the group that created the Deathclaw had different versions that they were experimenting with, hence why they would end up with such drastically different creatures. So with Fallout Tactics, we are left with a completely different creature with only superficial similarities and a chunk of lore of dubious legitimacy. But while we are wading through the waters of questionable canon, the next game, chronologically speaking, is Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. This wouldn't be a complete treatise of Deathclaws in the Fallout series if we didn't examine what all the games have to say for one of Fallout's icons. Deathclaws in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel are isolated to one location only, the Secret Vault. The Secret Vault was an experimental vault where, among many other things, they were experimenting on Deathclaws using FEV and radiation. This experimentation led to a very different breed of Deathclaw, one that seems to have a stronger and more muscular upper body that necessitates a different kind of run. They support themselves on their front knuckles and run on all fours, not too dissimilar to the knuckle walk that chimps and gorillas do. The Deathclaws are aptly referred to as experimental Deathclaws, sporting horns and spikes in a configuration different from anything prior. The Deathclaw types in ascending order of lethality are the baby Deathclaws, the normal Deathclaws, and the elder Deathclaws. Chameleon Deathclaws are now introduced, and although they are physically weaker than the elder Deathclaws, they can blend in with their environment, finally putting that chameleon DNA to work. The adolescent Deathclaw seems like it would be a step above the baby Deathclaws, but not as powerful as the normal Deathclaws. But these adolescent Deathclaws have a special treatment that make them the biggest of all variations, and it is absolutely massive, closer to a super mutant behemoth in size. Lastly is the Deathclaw Mother, who is one of the largest of all variations, with massive damage, an insane number of spikes, and a xenomorph-shaped head. The Deathclaw Mother also has the unique ability to regenerate health from radioactivity, another unique ability that we haven't seen up to this point. Well, that was fun, and although you might think it was a waste of time to go over games that aren't even considered canon, I promise that this will tie into the next several games to come. Fallout 3 is a return to form in more than just one way. The Deathclaws look remarkably similar to the sprites in Fallout and Fallout 2, with similar proportions, horns, and coloring. Deathclaws are tied for the most damaging creature in the base game, tying damage with super mutant behemoths while being able to run faster, giving the player less time to react. Inversely, the super mutant behemoths have more HP, so depending on the circumstances, the Deathclaw or the behemoth could be considered the strongest creatures in the game. It isn't until the Broken Steel add-on is installed and the player achieves higher levels that creatures like the albino rad scorpion eclipse the Deathclaw in sheer damage and HP. In a departure from every single game up to this point, there is no Deathclaw mother type. There are only conventional Deathclaws. The Enclave in Fallout 3 have not given up their hopes of harnessing the power of the Deathclaw, and set about creating what they call domestication units. These contraptions affixed to the head of captured Deathclaws, interfacing with the brain and adding large blinders so that they can control the Deathclaws, essentially making them friendly towards Enclave units and unleashing their fury on those that oppose the Enclave. This project is not without its problems though, since the domestication units can be targeted in battle, and upon a critical hit, they will malfunction. The Deathclaw is no longer controlled and will attack any and all, including the Enclave units. Alternatively, the Brotherhood will equip the Lone Wanderer with an experimental device called the Control Scrambler that interferes with the signals from the domestication units. It reverses the effects, making the Deathclaw aggro against the Enclave, but remain friendly towards the player. We get no information related to how the Deathclaws are found on the East Coast, and their presence is well known by everyone in the Capital Wasteland. They are regular encounters at higher levels, and are found everywhere except in the DC city proper, which is a bit peculiar. The parallels with the Deathclaws in Fallout 2 are unmistakable. They are portrayed almost exactly the same way physically, they are among the most dangerous of all creatures, and once again they are the subject of an Enclave project to weaponize them for their own ends. Just like the efforts to increase Deathclaw intelligence, the domestication project ends in failure, showing that the fearsome Deathclaw just cannot be contained. Fallout New Vegas takes place a few years after Fallout 3, but once again shows how life is going over in the western area of the United States. Deathclaws are no stranger to the Mojave, and people are well aware of what they are and what they are capable of. They are also not as widely distributed as they were in Fallout 2 or Fallout 3. Rather, they are largely contained within certain areas, like the Junction Quarry, the Dead Wind Cavern, Deathclaw Promontory, and the Gypsum Train Yard. New Vegas reinforces the observations made by Joseph in Fallout 2 when he described the social order of intelligent Deathclaws. Deathclaws prefer to live in groups, which are led by an alpha male and a Deathclaw mother. One interesting difference though is that alpha Deathclaws are a darker gray color with longer and more curved horns, making for a truly menacing appearance. The Deathclaw mothers are blue now, and their horns go in the opposite direction of all other Deathclaw types, and she has overly pronounced teeth in her lower jaw. The Deathclaw mother and alpha are so fundamental to a group of Deathclaws that as long as they remain alive, the group will always recover and start to grow again. Should the courier want to rid the Quarry Junction of Deathclaws for good, they must take out the alpha and mother to make sure the Deathclaws don't make a comeback. In addition to the alpha and the mother, there are Deathclaw babies, young Deathclaws, and normal Deathclaws, but the alpha Deathclaws are the most dangerous of them all. In fact, Deathclaws once again take the crown as the most dangerous creature in the entirety of the Mojave, just like in Fallout and Fallout 2. There are 3 special variants of Deathclaw that also need to be mentioned. The blind Deathclaw, which is usually found in a group around the Gypsum Train Yard. One would think that being blind would make them easier to avoid, but their other senses have been heightened to the point that they are even harder to evade. They attack swiftly and have a good deal of health, but they do deal less damage, presumably because they're less precise with their attacks. There is no reason given for their blind condition, and we are left to assume it is some sort of mutation since it affects the entire group. But this really calls back to the experimental Deathclaws of the Brotherhood of Steel game, which were all blind due to the extensive experimentation performed on them. See? I told you it would tie in later. Irradiated Deathclaws are yet another variant, but only encountered after the events of Lonesome Road, after the player chooses a location to destroy with the nuclear bombs. Irradiated Deathclaws hit hard since they scale to the player's level and they deal additional radiation damage, but they seem to have been severely damaged by the nuclear blasts because they have 0 damage threshold. Lastly, the mythical legendary Deathclaw, which has the most health of any Deathclaw, can be found in the Deadwind Cavern, although it is not as damaging as a max level Alpha Deathclaw. It is also worth pointing out that the legendary Deathclaw is beat out by the legendary Bloatfly, but can also be beat out by the legendary Fire Gecko due to the additional fire damage from the gecko. There are 2 named Deathclaws as well. Rar, who is an Alpha Deathclaw living in the Divide with very high special stats, HP, and damage, and is the source for the extremely damaging Deathclaw Gauntlet, Fist of Rar. Stripe is another unique Deathclaw, one that is found at Big Mountain, who has been shrunk down due to the zany experiments that take place here. Although his small size means that his rush and jump attack has a smaller range, don't underestimate him because he does the same amount of damage as an Alpha Deathclaw and has an incredible 850 HP to boot. Stripe is a reference to the antagonist in the Gremlins movie who shares the same name. They both share an affinity for chicken, and Stripe the Deathclaw displays an irrational fear of the fountain at the center of Higgs Village because Stripe of Gremlins fame died in a similar fountain. Although New Vegas didn't clarify or expand on Deathclaw lore, it reinforced many of the things established in Fallout 2, as well as showing us how Deathclaws are affected by a nuclear strike and giving a nod towards the Brotherhood of Steel, of all games, with their blind Deathclaws. It is also worth noting that Alpha Deathclaws, which we know are males, can have Deathclaw eggs looted from their bodies. Is this a mistake? Or do male Deathclaws care for individual eggs or incubate them in some capacity? Fallout 4 is the next game, taking place after Fallout New Vegas in the year 2287, across the continent in Boston. Deathclaws are once again a ferocious enemy, but they have a number of differences from anything we have seen prior. They are darker in color with sharply curved horns, similar to the Alpha Deathclaws in Fallout New Vegas. They also display a snake-like forked tongue that they can use to lick the air, presumably smelling similar to a snake. Lastly, they have a prominent sickle-like claw on each foot, similar to raptors of old, like Deinonychus, that prowled the earth millions of years prior. Deathclaws in the Commonwealth also show enhanced behaviors when fighting, including running in abrupt zigzag patterns to dodge incoming fire, lifting the player character in the air, slashing them and then slamming them down, usually crippling the player in the process. In addition, they will throw sand to obscure the player's vision, and even throw large objects like cars at enemies, usually resulting in massive damage or outright death, because cars are the real apex predator of the Commonwealth. They display an ability to ambush targets, like when the sole survivor steps out on the rooftop of the Haymarket Mall, which causes the Deathclaw to pull itself up from the side of the building and attack. Deathclaws are not found in large groups like in New Vegas, but still display a strong desire to protect their eggs. A Deathclaw tracks and hunts down a group of gunners that were transporting Deathclaw eggs for a client, catching up to them, and killing the entire group as a form of retribution, and to rescue the egg that they were transporting. Likewise, should the sole survivor decide to return the egg to the nest, a Deathclaw will show remarkable understanding as the sole survivor approaches, and allows the sole survivor to return the egg and leave peaceably, so long as the player can suppress the urge to fire on one of the scariest creatures in the whole game. The Commonwealth is home to a vast number of Deathclaw types that range in HP and damage output. Starting at the weakest of all variants and getting progressively stronger, the basic Deathclaw is the bottom of the totem pole. Alpha Deathclaws are the next strongest, and seem to be taking a page from New Vegas with this kind of designation. Glowing Deathclaws are the next strongest, and seem to yet again take inspiration from New Vegas since they do additional radiation damage. Deathclaw Matriarchs are the next strongest, with their horns not curved forward and then up, but rather at an angle to the skull and are a bit straighter. The Savage Deathclaw is the next strongest, and usually what is encountered at the Museum of Witchcraft, having killed the gunners who had the Deathclaw egg. The Albino Deathclaw is the next strongest, followed by the Chameleon Deathclaw. The Chameleon Deathclaw doesn't use its color-changing abilities to blend in, rather they will shift color upon becoming alerted to a threat and attacking. They can turn red, orange, green, or teal, and are otherwise a darker gray color. This seems to be a nod towards the chameleon origins of the creature, as well as a reference to Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, which was the first instance of a chameleon Deathclaw. The Mythic Deathclaw is the strongest of all and always matches the player's level. This is the first instance on the East Coast that we get confirmation of Alpha Deathclaws and Deathclaw Matriarchs, which are both types seen and established on the West Coast since Fallout 2. However, Deathclaws in Fallout 4 seem to be more independent and are not encountered in large groups like in Fallout New Vegas. Additionally, it doesn't seem that they rely on an Alpha Deathclaw and Mother Deathclaw to lead a pack. It is interesting to note that under no circumstances for the West Coast Deathclaws can anyone control the Deathclaws. The Animal Friend perk, which has a chance of making wasteland animals friendly to the player, does not apply to them, and the Deathclaws are always hostile. In contrast, the East Coast Deathclaws seem to be able to be controlled, even if for just a little bit. The domestication units seem to work well as long as they are not damaged or interfered with, and in Fallout 4 the player can pacify a Deathclaw with the Wasteland Whisperer perk. The only Deathclaw that they are unable to pacify is the Mythic Deathclaw because it always matches the player's level, and the perk only works on creatures that are a lower level than the player. Additionally, the Beta Wave Emitter is a craftable item that pacifies many wasteland creatures, including Deathclaws that are caught and put within the vicinity of the emitter. This seems to show that while physically strong, East Coast Deathclaws may be mentally weaker and more susceptible to pacification technologies. The Mythic Deathclaw is the strongest of all variants, and when stacked against the strongest variants of other creatures, there isn't a clear winner. It is more damaging than an ancient super mutant behemoth and Nuka-Lurk Queen, but has less health than the latter two creatures, and does not benefit from a ranged attack like they both do either. Again, it seems to depend on the circumstances when it comes to judging what the most powerful creature is, and therefore Deathclaws are not the undisputed king of the wasteland creatures like it was in Fallout, Fallout 2, and Fallout New Vegas. Deathclaws are seen in many places and during many encounters, although they do typically stick to the higher level areas and have a special affinity for the northeast portion of the map and glowing sea. The designer of the Fallout 4 Deathclaw relates some of his inspiration for the design, using cues from a lion for some of the facial features and eyes, and mentions that at one point it was not clear whether or not Deathclaws would even be in Fallout 4, which is super surprising to hear. There is a cut type that was to be introduced in the Nuka World DLC, the Nuka Deathclaw, which would have glowed blue like the Nuka-Lurks and would have undoubtedly been one of the most dangerous of all variants. Fallout 76 is the last game to come out in the series, but also takes place the earliest of all the games. Taking place in Appalachia and only 25 years after the bombs, it is not necessarily surprising, but it is important to note that Deathclaws are present at this point in time on the East Coast. Deathclaws seem to be more limited than in Fallout 4, generally speaking to very specific locations like in Fallout New Vegas, such as Deathclaw Island and the Hopewell Cave, just to mention a few. Fallout 76 has all the same types as Fallout 4, in the same order of strength and appearance, with two notable additions. Deathclaws can be affected by the Scorched Plague. However, Scorched Deathclaws, regardless of their title, like the Scorched Alpha Deathclaw for example, only ever have the stats of the base Deathclaw, meaning that the Scorched Plague negatively affects their ability to deal more than just basic damage. The other new type is the Prime Deathclaw, which are particularly difficult and dangerous, and is only confronted as an end boss for the Primal Cuts event. It is worth noting that the Animal Friend perk now does allow the player to pacify Deathclaws, and can even be tamed enough to become a pet that will stay at the player's camp. This once again shows that the East Coast Deathclaws show a higher susceptibility towards being pacified and domesticated, which is something that would be interesting to explore in more depth. Fallout 76 also adds an important lore detail in a terminal entry at the Enclave research base. They captured a Deathclaw, and upon doing experiments and research on it, conclude that Deathclaws are the result of precise genetic manipulation, and while they're not sure, they posit the possibility that the Deathclaws are their own creation. We still don't know completely for sure, but this seems to hint towards Deathclaws having been engineered by the Enclave, or at least by the portions of the US government that was controlled by the Enclave, and could explain the special affinity they have for the creatures. They just keep trying and failing to harness the destructive nature of these creatures, but failing is as core to the Enclave as their claimed American patriotism, so we shouldn't be all that surprised. Additionally, the presence of Deathclaws in the Appalachian region only 25 years after the Great War would seem to imply that Deathclaws may have started on or near the East Coast. Had they originated from the West Coast, like the early games don't outright state but kind of seem to imply, then that would only give them 25 years to naturally expand over 2,000 miles away to Appalachia. And in my estimation, that is just an unrealistic expectation for natural expansion. The presence of Deathclaws in Appalachia complicates the statement that Deathclaws are the result of further modification by the Master. This could only be true if the West Coast Deathclaws are somehow a different species as a result of additional genetic tinkering by the Master. This piece of information is dubious. It comes from the strategy guide, which is not as authoritative as the games, and has not been substantiated in any game since. I think we can infer from the games that Deathclaws were present on the East Coast very early on, possibly being the or one of the origins of Deathclaws. Southern California around the year 2161, when Fallout 1 takes place, could also be an area where Deathclaws are just moving into, since most people consider the Deathclaw to be an urban legend, and they can be found in the fewest locations of all the other games. Now, the only other information I want to add to this analysis of all Deathclaw lore is something said in the Fallout Apocrypha by Chris Avallone, the original creator of the Fallout Bible. Since we don't necessarily know the fate of the intelligent Deathclaws in Fallout 2, Chris relates that the original creators of Fallout were not wild about the idea of talking animals, and therefore cut the entire sentient raccoon race, the Slanter, from Fallout 1, and therefore he thinks that, in the spirit of that vision, that intelligent Deathclaws are dead and gone from the wasteland after the events of Fallout 2. So there we have it. A creature more legend than anything in the first Fallout, then so common in Fallout 2 that they had to be spiced up by becoming intelligent as a byproduct of Enclave meddling. Fallout Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel were the awkward teen years that no one wants to acknowledge or remember, but there was some real experimenting going on, if you know what I mean. Fallout 3 is such a return to form that it is almost a complete rehash of Deathclaws in Fallout 2. But the Deathclaw is now competing with similarly dangerous creatures like the super mutant behemoth. Fallout 3's return to form was expanded in New Vegas and brought more in line with the way Deathclaws were portrayed in Fallout 2, while also expanding the kind of Deathclaws that can be found. Fallout 4 reimagined both how Deathclaws look and behave, while expanding the different kinds of Deathclaws we can encounter, while acknowledging the chameleon origin. Finally, Fallout 76 seems to confirm the Enclave's involvement in creating the Deathclaw and confirming their presence super early on the East Coast, possibly hinting to the East Coast being their origin point. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of this. What is your favorite version of all the Deathclaws? Do you prefer a rarely seen, almost legendary creature, or a more commonly encountered and highly diverse foe? Are intelligent Deathclaws a good idea? And should they make a comeback in a future game? I want to hear what you think. Huge thanks to my patrons. These embracers of Adam's glow help me continue to bring Adam's word to all that will hear. Stay strong, Adam's children. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week.